Hi, today we are covering two poems, Frank O'Hara's Lana Turner Has Collapsed and Aphra Ben's On Her Loving Two Equally. And the class is meant to help us think about queer poetry. Um, and I'm going to focus today on Frank O'Hara, who was a queer poet who wrote primarily in the 1950s and 60s. Aphra Ben, also a fascinating figure who I could talk about for ages. Really, she's a later 17th, early 18th century novelist, playwright, and poet. A fascinating person. But I'm going to focus today on Frank O'Hara. So there you can see a picture of O'Hara wearing a tweed jacket, smoking a cigarette, and sitting up against a brick building. This is New York City. O'Hara was what we would call a city poet, very interested in thinking about writing about urban life. So I thought I would just say a little bit about O'Hara before getting to the poem. O'Hara was an avant-garde poet who wrote primarily in the 1950s and 60s until his untimely death in 1965. He was only age 40, tragically ran over when he was on Fire Island. He was run over by a dune buggy in the middle of the night. It was a terrible tragedy, and it took his life when he was at the peak of his poetic capabilities. O'Hara was bisexual. I mean, mostly gay, but mostly had relationships with men, but was also interested in women, and so that's why I'm teaching O'Hara along with Ben, who is also kind of bisexual and queer, what we would today call bisexual, but definitely a queer poet as well. So O'Hara was very interested and involved in the art world of New York City. He was a curator. For many years, he worked at the front desk of MoMA in New York City. And he eventually became a curator, and was very knowledgeable about art, and so that art makes its way into his poetry all the time. And he was close friends with several of the most well-known abstract expressionist painters from the 50s and early 60s, including Willem and Elaine de Kooning, Jasper Johns, Larry Rivers, Joan Mitchell. You can see actually all of these painters have paintings at the Milwaukee Museum of Art. I think with the exception of Elaine de Kooning, all of these painters are represented, and I would encourage you to go to the Museum of Art at Milwaukee. It's a beautiful building and an amazing collection. And check out these abstract expressionist painters while you're there, and you'll get a sense of what was happening artistically at around the time that O'Hara was writing. Abstract expressionism is really about the gestural. Like Jackson Pollock also is an abstract expressionist. It's about the gestural and the psychological and the emotional aspects of painting, and some of that can also be traced in O'Hara's poetry. O'Hara is known for being the leader of what was called the New York School. There was a New York School of Painting and Poetry, but he was highly influential on a number of poets who followed in his stead, including Bill Berkson, Joe Brainerd, and others. He was contemporaneous also with Allen Ginsberg, who tends to get a little bit more acknowledgement and publicity. But O'Hara is considered one of the great 20th century American poets, and so he wrote a book of poems called Lunch Poems, and these were a series of poems that he had written during his lunch hour when he was working at MoMA, when he would just walk out into the city and go get lunch and then come back, and he would write poems there at his desk, or he would come home and get on his typewriter at the end of the day and write about what he observed happening in the streets of New York City. So he's very much somebody who is interested in the people who are around him. He was a lover of persons, especially talented, artistic, creative persons. And Lunch Poems, just as a side, was dedicated to Joseph LeSueur, who is my uncle. So I'm writing a little bit about their relationship. I've written about them, and I'm working on a biography about my uncle, who was O'Hara's roommate and lover and friend for 10 years. So that's an aside, though, and maybe a little bit why I'm interested in him, other than the fact that O'Hara is just a brilliant poet. And he mixed the names of his friends, including Joe and others, with actors, celebrities, artists, poets. He loved the MGM films of the 40s and 50s, and so he writes a lot about James Dean, right, and Marilyn Monroe. He was somebody who was very interested in celebrity culture. And the poem that he wrote that I want to look at is about Lana Turner, who, if you've not heard of Lana Turner, she was one of these sort of movie star celebrities whose personal life ended up blending with her screen life. She maybe most famously appeared in the film Imitation of Life, but she had a very tumultuous off-screen life. She was like a tabloid figure, right? And some of her sort of off-screen shenanigans would end up inflecting the roles that she would take on. And so O'Hara decides to write a poem about Lana Turner. And it's actually, he wrote this poem on the Staten Island ferry as he was on his way to a reading. And then he read the poem at the reading. So that's the kind of poet that O'Hara was. He was very much interested in the moment. But anyway, here you can see a picture of Lana Turner. She's looking directly at the camera. She's got blonde hair, kind of a sultry look on her face, and big pearl earrings. So I'm going to read with you right now. It's a short poem. And the title is Lana Turner Has Collapsed. Lana Turner has collapsed. I was trotting along and suddenly it started raining and snowing, and you said it was hailing, but hailing hits you on the head hard, so it was really snowing and raining, and I was in such a hurry to meet you, but the traffic was acting exactly like the sky, and suddenly I see a headline, Lana Turner has collapsed. There is no snow in Hollywood. There is no rain in California. I have been to lots of parties and acted perfectly disgraceful, but I never actually collapsed. Oh, Lana Turner, we love you. Get up. So one of the things that you might immediately note about this poem as I read it aloud is the enjambment. As we move from line to line, there is no punctuation, there's no cessation, right? We're just, there's no pause between many of the lines. As soon as we start with, I was trotting along, really all the way up until we get to the headline, Lana Turner has collapsed. there's no pause, right? There's almost a breathlessness with which O'Hara is writing this poem, and the sort of breathlessness is reflected in the walking through this snowstorm in New York City, right? And it's funny, right? He's in New York City. He's walking through the rain and the snow. We've all experienced this in the Midwest, that wintry mix. And he's in a hurry, right? And he's in a hurry to meet you. The you is some unknown person who he's directing this poem to. So it's a second person poem, we would call it. And then the note that the traffic was acting exactly like the sky. So it's New York City, it's Manhattan, it's wintry mix, right? And everything is kind of chaos. And then you get to that headline, Lana Turner has collapsed. And finally, there's a break, right? We finally pause. And everything from that line after is this shift from the East Coast to the West Coast, right? Where Lana Turner lived. There is no snow in Hollywood. There is no rain in California. And then the kind of tabloid enunciation here. And also, this is like really gossipy, right? I have been to lots of parties and acted perfectly disgraceful, but I never actually collapsed. Right. There's a kind of, there's an empathy there, but there's also a little bit of condescension, right? Yeah, I've been messed up at parties, but I've never actually fallen over, right? And then that last line, "Oh, Lana Turner, we love you, get up," is a kind of articulation of an expression of his admiration and love for Lana Turner, in addition to what she represents in the American movie Hollywood industry imagination, right? She's kind of messy, and O'Hara is addressing this poem to a you, right? To another person. We could be that other person. And we're both standing looking over Lana Turner's collapsed body. And we are kind of entertained by that, almost to a certain extent. But ultimately, there's also the love there in the end, and the message for her to actually get up. So yeah, enjambment, a swift rhythm, the headline that kind of marks, I would say, the two parts of the poem, right? The New York City part and the California part. East Coast, West Coast, terrible weather, beautiful weather, Hollywood tabloid celebrity, and the parting message, the plea that Lana Turner stand up. And so we might think a little bit about celebrity culture, Hollywood movies, maybe even singers, songwriters, who are the kind of sultry, fiery, messy people who sing to us or who entertain us today. That might be a Lana Turner type of figure. Back in the aughts, I thought, Amy Winehouse would be the kind of figure who would stand in for Lana Turner here. But I don't know. I mean, maybe you have insights into who a Lana Turner type of figure would be now. But this is a kind of timeless poem, I think. Timeless for those of us who understand celebrity culture. Yeah, so that's it for my reading of Lana Turner Has Collapsed. I'm going to give you, I'm also going to leave you a link so that you can watch and listen to Frank O'Hara read a poem, one of my very favorites, called Having a Coke with You, which is just a beautiful love poem. It's one of the most extraordinary, beautiful, and just charming poems. And I would encourage you to read a lot of Frank O'Hara because he's just a magnificent poet, and he's funny, he's profound, he's gossipy, and he's queer, right? A lot of his poems have messages. And he lived and worked well before Stonewall happened. And so his life is marked by relationships that he had with other men, sometimes women, and that's also interesting, right? Is to think about how he represented his own sexuality in his poetry. That's it for today. I will give you the option to write on either Frank O'Hara or Afra Ben in your responses, and I hope you all have a good one. Take care.